Time ago, Dr. Rick Haney told me, he said, plants fix science. Actually, he said plants fix dirt. And so, but he's right. Without the plant, you don't have the mechanism for the sun's energy. Typically, the cropland was less than half, even though it was a better soil, inherently better soil. It's usually less than half of the carbon that was available in the grassland. And so I started to see that we had harvested out so much of this carbon that was in our initial system. You just brought it up one step on a long staircase.
I'm your host, and today's guest truly needs no introduction. In the world of regenerative agriculture, he spent 4 decades with the NRCS, helped pioneer the 5 principles of soil health, and continues to push the boundaries of what's possible at the legendary Minokin Farm. If you've ever felt like no-till was a great start, but not the whole solution, this episode is for you. We're diving deep into Beyond the No-Till Drill, the system-level blueprint for soil health. Jay, it's an absolute honor to have you on the show. Welcome to Soil Talks. Jay Fuhrer.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate being here.
You've seen this, idea of extracting nutrition from the dirt to really a stewardship of living soil. And it's come about more and more in the past, I would say, decade would you say? Maybe a little bit longer than that really they started pushing the envelope further and further forward for soil health?
Well, I think the last, like you said, 10 years, last 10, 15 years, it's probably, especially the last 10, it probably has traction that it hasn't had before. And so it was gaining traction over time, but I think the last 10 years, it's really evolved. And I think we're learning more all the time, and fortunately, if we're willing to, I think then you can be along for that ride, because it's a complex topic in terms of just soils alone, and I think that gives us a good starting point. And so, too, I just want to mention that my involvement on the soil health principles via USDA was. I wrote descriptions for the principles. And so I think in Gabe Brown's book, he mentions that the nature wrote the principle. And then I think it's really up to us then to write a description for the principle. And so the descriptions that I wrote over time, they eventually were accepted and posted on the NRCS websites, but that took a little time. There's an acclimation period in most things, but those descriptions really give us that starting point. And so, yeah, I think that to me was, if you've achieved anything in life, you've stood on some shoulders of different people.
Yeah, you have to, in order, that's the only way you do achieve anything, is you have to just keep kind of pushing or holding the flag and carrying that forward as generations pass, correct?
Yeah, and people are good about giving you a boost up, and so especially as we go from generation to generation, and so you get some generational knowledge in it as well. But really, every time I went to write descriptions or anything of that nature, I was always visiting with a lot of different mentors, and these are all people that I stood on their shoulders, and they not only allowed that, but they also gave me a push up. And so, you start to work toward a common cause, and we need to recognize those people for sure.
Absolutely. Well, no, that's great. Well, Jay, you often say that carbon-deficient soil is a universal problem, correct? Why is that carbon the currency of, or why is carbon, the currency of a successful farm?
Well, the whole carbon scenario, when you look at it, I think it's a common resource concern in every country. And I think it exists in every state in the U.S. and every county. And so farming is an extraction business. And so, it's the sun's energy that runs this. And so when we start to realize the magnitude, right? We got to realize the magnitude of the engine that runs our soils. And so carbon is the carrier of the sun's energy. And so when you look at the whole scenario of the sun, well, what is the magnitude? Well, everything that we can find on Good Science on this says the Earth would fit inside the sun over 1 million times. So that gives us a pretty good idea that the sun's pretty large. The moon can fit inside the Earth 40 sometimes. So the moon's quite small, but the sun, the Earth can fit inside the sun over 1 million times. So the old analogy always was that a football field, and you go to the 0 yard, to go to the goal line on one end and put a basketball, and go to the goal line on the other end, and you put a mustard seed. And there you're getting into the size differential. It takes over 8 minutes for the sun's light to reach Earth. And so therein lies light years and all these things we learned when we were in grade school and junior high. But the magnitude of the sun, so it's the carrier of that energy. And so I think people that have been successful with carbon, I think they think of it more in terms of carbon stewardship. And there's so much information and discussion and data out on carbon sequestration. But carbon sequestration is just one small part of the whole carbon stewardship world. And so I think the people that have been successful on farms, ranches, orchards, gardens, etc., I think they look at it more in the stewardship realm, and they have a bigger picture on carbon and the energy.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess as we move through it, you said, the sun is the energy, and you think about that, and you think it's really the last form of anything that's free, right? So the guy that can take the most energy into their fields it's going to be the guy that wins, right? Meaning through photosynthesis.
Well, yeah. And for us too, and just probably in the US or even in the world, we're somewhere around 95% of the energy on this planet that we use is it's all sun related. And it's either comes in the form of fossil or it comes in the form of contemporary. But that's about 95, 96%. After that, probably uranium would be, much smaller amount of the energy. And so you look at that, so it's not just driving our soils, but it's driving the world. And at this point in time, still a huge amount, and directly or indirectly. So the magnitude of that is significant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I probably shouldn't have said anything that it's free energy, huh? Tell you, next thing you know, everybody's going to get a tax bill for the sun. That'll be the next thing.
Well, and the people that have been successful with the carbon, they've extended their photosynthetic periods, and so we had shrunk those so dramatically. There's a human aspect of and I think it's worldwide in Homo sapiens. They want to be efficient when they have a business, whether it's a farm or whatever it is. And they want to be efficient, and that efficiency drives them to do some things that they maybe wouldn't do otherwise. And so one of them is this efficiency on a cropping system. So you shrunk your photosynthetic period. Well, it's kind of like locking up the refrigerator door for a period of time, and you don't get access to any food. Whereas when they extended it, well, then the lock came off, and we saw a whole change biologically.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move on. I'm excited about this next part, the Minokin Farm story and the shift in the mindset. Okay. This whole section is going to be on this. And this is what I'm excited to talk to you about it. The evolution. Let us talk about your transition from traditional conservation to a biological system, or to biological systems, I should really say.
So one of the training sessions that I took was holistic training, and Alan Savory taught it in Bismarck, North Dakota in the late 80s. And that really helped me from the viewpoint of the human aspect, right? Because typically I was dealing with something like soils or plants or animals, but that now the human aspect. And so I started to understand that a little better. And then when I got into the 90s, I started looking at writing descriptions, started to think in terms of the soil health principles, which work off of dynamic soil properties. And so I had the advantage of spending a lot of time with different soil scientists as well. Went back early on when soil quality within the agency was a big item. And soil quality was also was based on dynamic soil properties, things you can influence with management, things you can make better or worse. Okay. And so that was very helpful. So when we started looking at putting something out like a term like soil health, it was very similar, but it was a language. It needed a language. And so the descriptions kind of helped with the language because soil quality effort was somewhat similar, but it didn't have a language. And so it needed an interpreter to come from the lab and to actually be placed into a system and make this impact. And so that, just my opinion, but that's kind of where I saw some of the difference. And so I started working on descriptions. I would hate to show you the first ones, Brandon. I, I, I don't want to show you the first ones at all. The second ones, I've rewritten them a few times. I started out with brief. You got to start somewhere. And then you would start ground proofing it, right? And so the advantage, everyone's got their unfair advantage. My unfair advantage was I worked on different fields with different farmers and clients for a lot of years. And so it gave me all these separate little scenarios to look at. And then I would usually, in addition to whatever assessment you're doing, a lot of times I would grab some soils in their native grasslands and soils in their cropland. And then you started to see that typically the cropland was less than half, even though it was a better soil, inherently better soil. It's usually less than half of the carbon that was available in the grassland. And so I started to see that we had harvested out so much of this carbon that was in our initial systems. Okay. And so that was kind of that 10-year period where I started looking at a lot of those scenarios and started putting some of those thoughts together. And then in the last 10 years that I actually worked for NRCS, so that would have been from 10 to 20. During that period of time, I just tried to speak for the resource. And so you tried to be that voice at the table that spoke for the resource and tried to achieve something from that. Something that would be different than what you had before, would be an improvement. And once you have the soil health principles in place and somewhat of a description for your neck of the woods, then that puts you in a better position to do that. Because when that moment comes, and sometimes you've seen this, Brandon, it can be brief. That moment of opportunity can be kind of brief. And so if you have something that you can bring forward, then I think you can make an impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No. And so that's kind of the evolution. It's over those decades of time that it just evolved from just being just being traditional conservationists to really looking at the biological systems approach.
It did. And then in 2009 is when the Minokin Farm evolved, because here in Burley County, where I worked out of for most of my career, we had a team that we had put together, and we self-educated. And when we met, we would take a topic and review it. And at that point in time, we thought we needed a place where we can put some things on the ground, cover crop combinations and those type things for diversity, animal impact, and all those. And so that farm evolved out of that group.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, let's look at some resource concerns now. How does Minokin Farm identify, your resource concerns per se, like your salinity, erosion, water infiltration? A lot less of it now, obviously, but before that, it was a lot. When you started, say, there was a lot more. Before you choose those, before you choose like a practice to implement onto the farm, how do you like what's the measuring metrics?
Well, I like the soil health assessment process. And so it's a process, where you dig a cubic foot, right, and you can do the earthworm counts. You look at the surface of the soil, and you can determine if it's capped or not. You look at the rooting depth, and you can determine if it's got horizontal rooting or if it's got straight rooting. What are the plants doing? And so you start doing infiltration. To see what your infiltration rate is. We'd always set up 5 canisters, and we would throw out the high and the low and then average the remaining 3. And so it gives us an understanding on infiltration. And we started doing slake, and slake eventually evolved into large, tall containers for demos. But initially in the field, it was just a small container. Did it dissolve or didn't it? And then probably one of the best tools, of course, is your spade, for comparisons. Fence line to cropland to grassland. And you start getting 2, 3, 4 of those cores laying next to each other on the end gate. It plays out a lot easier for everybody then to see that, right? And so I would always just compare a farmer's soils to his own farm. And so, because all those things are there. And so I would compare them to his own scenario. And that would allow you to visually see that. Right? And so then you start to, and then I generally would send in a soils analysis as well, which was always very helpful from the viewpoint of what's happened with carbon. Just for one item. And so that kind of got us to the point, a lot of these now you can go online, you can get a soil health assessment. It's a process. You might do 4 or 5 of them. You might do 6 of them, 7 of them, whatever. And it's a procedure, right? And also I like VES. More recently, Visual Assessment of Soil Structure is the acronym. And Mark Liebig, our soil scientist over at the ARS station here in Mandan, North Dakota, taught us that a number of years ago. And VES, first of all, I should say, I like things that don't cost anything.
Sure. You can do them right on the farm, right?
You want to do them right there. And so VES is a 1 through 5 rating. And so it's a real good before and after thing. And so you can initially, because I was a conservation planner, I was a conservationist, you'd set up your process and you get an idea of what your rating is, right? So maybe you were a 3, okay? And so then you want a small number, you want to get to a 2 or get to a 1. And so it was a nice way to do that. And then probably the one that I probably used an awful lot along with my spade was just 2 sieves, 2 soil sieves, 1 millimeter and a 2 millimeter. And you put them on top of each other, put some soil in, and eventually you get these well-sorted aggregates. And they get very uniform looking visually. If you look at them under a microscope, they're not, right? Because they're oddly shaped because you need a pore space. But if you look at them with the human eye at a 1 millimeter, they look rather uniform. Well, then you'd sprinkle them on kind of like pepper on an egg. You sprinkle on the aggregates into a little container of water. And within 10 minutes, it usually plays out one way or the other. You'll know if you have a water stable aggregate or not. And so all these features are what we used over time, and eventually got them kind of packaged up a bit more, if you will. But all things that I think the soils division has known a long time. And again, it's a lot of it is how do you take that information, get it into a cropping system, grazing system.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then that's when, after you guys would do this test, then that's when you would start to, implement certain practices then on that farm. Then after that, after the test, you're like, okay, well, this test is telling me, it has high compaction or whatever that may look like. And then that's when you would implement other things.
So a long time ago, Dr. Rick Haney told me, he said, plants fix soils. Actually, he said plants fix dirt. And he said, I always like to say dirt because then it really gets their attention. But he's right. Without the plant, you don't have the mechanism for the sun's energy. And so you have to have the plant. And so then we started to really, just understand more about plant physiology over time. Because initially plant physiology, wasn't real high on my list of things that I knew a whole lot about, and I'm still trying to learn. It's a complex topic, but very, very challenging, rewarding, enjoying topic.
Sure, no, absolutely, yeah. And I guess that's the thing is, and as you look at that and you see it, and you look at and you start to implement these certain systems like within that farm, you would see year over year changes then. And then you could run those same tests back over them and say, okay, look, we're gaining on this. You know what? We're a little behind still.
What it does more than anything, Brandon, it gives you a little confidence that you're heading in the right direction. And so you struck off in what you're thinking that day is probably the right way to go on it. But what this becomes then is an indicator that, this is the general right direction. And so what I really liked and appreciated about principles is latitude to adapt and move around, and it's the large umbrella, but then how to do it specifically is so unique to your landscape, your weather, your labor, all those things. And it was the start for myself. It was the start of I started to see and connect a few dots together, and then what that did is it brought a lot of dots into focus that I couldn't see before. And also, in a way, it was really good, and then you start to realize how little you know. And I think when you realize how little you know, I think real learning starts.
That's when, that's right. That's exactly right. It's kind of like with exercise, right? When you get to the end and you can't do anymore, that's when the actual exercise begins, right? Or when you think you can't. So let's move on to this next point. Why is no-till, or I guess I should say, explain why no-till is a great start, but ultimately not enough on its own, just a no-till system.
Yeah. I can take a swing at that. So I want to start this part maybe by thinking a little bit about past terms. And so we use the term in the conservation world, the USDA world, NRCS world, we use the term conservation tillage for many years. And it was used from, I think I'd written down from 80 to 92. So from 80 to 92 in the Northern Plains, and I'm just talking about my awareness of it, okay? But during that period of time, everything, every meeting, every demonstration was based on conservation tillage. I never really liked that term because it was always way more about tillage than it was about conservation. Conservation definitely took the back seat to it. And then after that, we got into from 93 to 05, we started using the term locally here, no-till. And I wasn't real keen about that because it was just about the opener. And yes, we reduced soil erosion. When you go from tillage and you go to no-till, you're going to see an improvement in soil structure. There isn't much doubt of that. That's not the end of your road. Okay. You've just you've just
That's just the start.
you just brought it up one step on a long staircase. Okay.
This is really what you kind of develop, the 5 principles of soil health, right?
Yeah, the principle themselves, I think, like I said earlier, was probably written by nature or people with a much higher pay grade than my own. But
right.
but I took them and started to describe them for conservation planning.
Absolutely.
And so they were intended to be your starting point.
Yep.
And so as a conservation planner, then I would take these principles and I knew where I was going to start on that field. And so then also I was going to try to apply all of them because they're intended to work together.
Sure.
But also it doesn't always work that way in the human aspect.
Uh-huh.
And so sometimes you're going to end up with 2 of them, 3 of them, whatever. And so the goal is to put them all together if you can. And so we started with that. And I always started with armor.
Yep. Soil armor. Principle 1.
Yeah. I always listed it as number 1 whenever I could, because of what I saw locally here. And what I saw is our soils didn't change until they wouldn't hydrate until we put cover on. And so we're in a 16 to 17 inch precip zone. It varies wildly, right? Really low, really high. And then you put it all together, it averages. But when we actually covered these soils, they hydrated, and we didn't recognize those soils. They looked so strange. And so it was totally different because previous to that, in that kind of zone, I mean, your soils don't want to hydrate. And so if they don't hydrate, you have biologically, you have a hard time just feeding biology and putting a home for it and allowing them to move. Most importantly, build an aggregate. And so armor was always my first one. Yeah.
Right away. Yeah. Number 1, principle 1. Yeah. And, and could you kind of explain why, like, if you have a bare soil, and that's kind of where we're at here too, I'll be honest with you, Jay, you know, we don't have a lot of precip out here. We're in Montrose, Colorado, right, which I think you've been out here before, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yes. You know, and we're in the same boat. It's a high desert valley. It's like, oh, you live in Colorado? It's like, yeah, in the desert. Absolutely, we do. You know, I mean, you understand it. So, you know, if you could, why is bare soil a failed state then, would you say?
So, if you can put, you know, the cover on the soil, so you got so many things. So I'm going to go back to most of the soils, not so much in the desert, right? But most of the soils were built geologically with either forest or grasslands. Mm-hmm. And they all had something in common. They had an O horizon.
Okay.
And an O horizon was that decomposition layer that was on the surface. Okay. So you had large ruminants that came through, grazed. You had predators, moved the ruminants, and you had regrowth on the perennials. Mm-hmm. And so all of this started to stimulate and build these soils, you know, since our last glaciation, especially in the areas that were glaciated. And so during that period of time, that O horizon, as it decomposed, just was a slow feed system into these soils. Yeah. And so if I go into a field now on cropland, if I find an O horizon, it's going to be really small. Okay, it's going to be real fun, if it's there at all.
Yep.
Sometimes on a soil like getting into the whole desert scenarios, you're trying to improve the structure of the soil. So if you can have, you know, structure, aggregates, and glues, again, you got to write your descriptions, but those are essential to keep that soil in place.
Sure.
And so that O horizon played a huge role in most of the soils in the U.S. And, you know, we don't see it there much anymore.
Yeah.
If I go on to our pasture system at the Minokin Farm, you know, I can take my knife, and so I take a soil core out with my spade. Then I can take a knife and I can cut that O horizon. It might be 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, and I can take it like a hinge, right? So you want it always decomposing. Mm-hmm. It's got to be decomposing. If it's not decomposing, it's not doing its job, or you didn't get enough hoof action on it. all of those things come into play. It's not intended to just build up a duff layer that doesn't decompose. You want this decomposing. It's carbon stewardship.
Sure. It's similar to thatch in a lawn, right? It's that buildup that you don't want. You want to be cycling that back down in that O horizon.
You want it decomposing. It's always growing or decomposing, growing or decomposing. When it is just sitting there not doing either, right? It's just dead material. That's not always a positive thing for what you're looking at here. So you want it cycling.
Sure.
And so when I started looking at that in terms of a bare soil, well, then everything else came along. All of a sudden, you started to see these things that we talk about: infiltration, nutrient cycle, right? Nutrient cycle. And so, all of these things, salinity for us in the Northern Plains, salinity is a big item because we were underwater geologically.
Yep, here too.
So we have geological salts.
Yes.
And so if we run our water through a plant, transpiration, no issue. If we do evaporation, we're going to have issues.
Yep.
And so it's a process, but it cures a lot of things, just putting the cover on it.
Absolutely. And that's why it's principle 1. Now we'll move into principle 2, minimizing disturbance. You don't like to necessarily see a lot of disturbance out there, right? But we're going to kind of move beyond just the physical tillage, right? Because that's one way to disturb. But then we can discuss the chemical and biological disturbance, which I almost feels like more, I don't want to say it's more important, but it's a very large piece to the puzzle.
You might be in the right term, Brandon, when you say more important. It actually might be. But we already talked about the physical aspect of it with the no-till drill. So we already kind of talked about that part.
Yep.
And then I think the biggest concern became biological, because we shortened up our photosynthetic period. And so I think once we started to understand, I grew up in the summer fellow era as a kid on my dad's farm, working summer fellow with the chisel plow.
Sure.
And so, a third of the acres every year. Okay. And so you start looking at that and I remember the day my dad said to me, "We're not going to do this anymore." And I'm like, how can that be?
Sure.
Because didn't this pay the bills and all these things? And the only thing he said to me was, he said, we didn't know at the time what it was doing. And then he just walked away to do something else. But you start looking at the whole scenario. Well, when you have a green plant, that's a lot different than summer fellow, right? And so we had to get past that hurdle of what the green plant was doing for you. And so the photosynthetic, the biological portion of it was huge, and it's such a driver. And so I think the biology end of it, and then your soil food web starts to improve. Yes. Because now you're feeding it. You got the refrigerator door open, you got the ground covered, you got all these things that we didn't have before.
Yeah, exudates are flowing to the soil, into it.
Yeah, you're bringing the liquid carbon in, especially the first 6 to 8 weeks of a green plant's life. And so you have that period of time where you're feeding carbon. And so it's the carrier of the sun's energy. And without that, you can't get the sun's energy there.
That's right.
And so we had to get past that process, get through that little denial, little whatever, until, and then, those darn comparisons.
Yeah, and they told the truth.
And then the chemical end of it is, how can we reduce pesticide use, and how can we reduce commercial fertilizer use, or even use products that are more carbon friendly? And so all of those things started to come into play, and I think they became much more on the bubble, if you will, when we started thinking in terms of nutrient density. We need something that comes out of here that represents what is in this soil.
Sure.
And so how do we start to do that? And at that time, we didn't know Dr. James White at that time, and the whole rhizophagy, and starting to understand that soil food web comes into that root here and it's going to come out of that tip, and it's going to strip it of nutrient and kind of puke it back out to repopulate itself. We didn't understand how the forest and the prairie were fertilized before there was ever a human being on the planet.
Sure.
Yeah. And so we started to slowly understand these things, and then how when we stepped into this arena, when you step into the soil health principles, you should also be initially thinking about taking your reward. Because if you don't take your reward, meaning some reduction in the use of these products, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting up another step on that staircase.
Yeah.
Because it's probably going to keep you from that next step. Because there is a reward. And so we start to see that there's some advantages to this. How far you go with it, is up to any one individual. But there is a ways that you can go, how far you step into it. But I think the chemical end is big. I think the biological is like without that, the rest of it doesn't want to get off the ground either.
Yeah.
And the physical one was where I started. The first time I wrote descriptions, I wrote on this particular principle, I probably wrote just about physical. And then if you take a look at more recent efforts, I started stepping into the biological and started stepping into the chemical.
Sure.
But initially, all I could see was, the erosion rate and the physical aspect.
Yeah. And then you just kept moving on. And then let's move on to principle 3, plant diversity, the holy grail. So now if you would dive into the 4 crop types, warm and cool season grasses and broadleaves, and why a monoculture of no-till still fails the soil.
Well, I think the 4 crop types, and there's plant families, there's all these different aspects. You can break them down however you like. But the four that we started with were cool and warm season grasses and cool and warm season broadleaves, because they all have different exudates.
Sure.
And so you start to get that different exudate. You started to get a stronger diet that you fed to the biology. And again, especially that first 6 to 8 weeks. If you brought livestock in and you top those plants and let them regrow, well, guess what? You're probably going to get some more exudates.
Mm-hmm.
And so the plant diversity, I got real interested in it when I started to see on my follow-up that it was capable of moving the carbon dial. There isn't a lot of things that are going to move it.
Sure.
Our cropping systems are good evidence of that, because most of our cropping systems that we use aren't capable of moving the carbon dial. You're sometimes hoping not to lose carbon.
Absolutely.
And so we've lost a lot of carbon already, but not too many things we do moves it. But the plant diversity, especially in terms of cash crops combined with cover crops, is capable of moving some dials. And so it's again your starting point, but it's all the different exudates. Makes a huge difference on the environment.
Absolutely. So that plant diversity makes exudates. It's just like a buffet for them, right? It's just all different types of food sources for the microbes at the end of the day.
First time I saw the big change was when in 2006 we had a drought, and I think Gabe Brown and I were in no-till on the plains, and we were learning, sitting in a session from Ademir Caligari, the agronomist from South America, explaining cover crop combinations. And we just looked at each other. We didn't have to say a word. We just went back to North Dakota and started planting combinations. And we saw that first year. It was so amazing, and never looked back.
That's perfect. Principle 4, continual living roots. The carbon inlet. How does liquid sun feed the microbes, right? Which liquid sun is the exudates. So
liquid sun is the exudate. And so the continual, this is extending back our photosynthetic period to what it used to be.
Sure.
Prior to agriculture is an extraction business.
Absolutely.
Right? And so then how do we offset? Well, one way that we can offset is with cover crops. And so continual can be a perennial, or it can be annuals or biennials, but it is likely something that might be before, during, or after a cash crop. And so then we start to have this continual live root in place. Parts of the nation, one reason the northern plains and Canada have higher soil organic matter is because of winter. And so it settles down a bit, over not totally maybe, but it settles down quite a bit where we don't lose carbon over that period of time.
Sure.
Whereas if you're in the if you're on the far south end, you're in Texas, etc., same soil type, same rainfall, it's going to have much lower soil organic matter levels in it.
Sure.
And so you started to see this, and then we started to understand that, if we can extend that photosynthetic period, if we can do that, then we can build aggregates during periods of time we normally haven't.
Sure.
You can provide these exudates. Again, the sun's energy is coming into place. You gave it a place that it can be. You gave it a road.
Sure.
And then those things took place.
Yeah, no. Well, and that's one thing I was going to say too, Jay, is like when it does come back to that, is it's like that is, when I say that's the only free source of energy there is, you might as well take advantage of it, right? Living roots in the soil, right? Continually, it's going to pay off. It's going to pay you back in dividends in your soil.
It's what drives nature.
Sure.
It's what drives agriculture.
Sure.
It's what drives this planet.
Absolutely. And then principle 5, we'll move on. Livestock integration, using ruminants as mobile nutrient processors. How can we bring animals back to the land even if we don't own them, say? Because there's a lot of producers that are in that position, right? They don't own they're not livestock guys.
Yep, they don't have livestock, and usually they don't, meaning also they don't have water on the cropland, or they don't have fences on the cropland. And of course, now the collars with livestock are starting to make some difference. We have quite a few people locally starting to look at that concept. And so that probably helps. But I think you need to know somebody with livestock. And so if you are to that point on that step on that staircase that, you're looking at the livestock aspect of it now, then, we can go ahead and how can we work out an agreement? But it has to be somebody that understands what you're trying to achieve, what your goal is. And that person's has to work with that goal as well. Then you can get a scenario, I think, that can work with both. We've seen that occur. And so, bringing livestock into high tunnels, you can do with wool pellets, makes a nice scenario in high value vegetable production, those type things. But it's on large scale ag. You need a ruminant like that, sheep, cattle, those type scenarios, and they make food available day one. And so if they're not there, that material has to go through the total decomposition process. And if it's a dry environment, that's a slow process. Whereas you bring the livestock in, the ruminants always win. So you bring the livestock in and they process that through their fermentation tank, and they make food available day one. And so that's the huge difference with bringing livestock in versus, 2 fields after harvest, one you brought in livestock, one you just didn't bring in livestock. You're going to see a big difference in there in how the food was made available.
Advanced tactics and monitoring, planting green. I like this part. Jay, give us your experiences with planting soybeans into green cereal rye.
Well, one of our big motivations for doing this, so at Minokin Farm, we've done quite a bit of work planting green, which usually means you're getting a rye cover established the fall before. So in the Northern Plains, it's one of the few biennials that'll survive. So cereal rye, pretty hardy. And so we get it planted the fall before, and then we plant canola or soybean or pinto bean, a low carbon broadleaf crop. And so now you're looking at a high carbon cool season grass, building aggregates, right? And providing your protection. And then the first time we did this, we probably terminated that rye. I would say it was maybe 1/2 foot tall. Okay, we were being conservative because, it's going to take all our water and this and that and the other. And so you get a little conservative. And the most recent time we did it now, it went to maturity. It was actually starting to head. And so you're talking about a lot of biomass to plant in. So the interesting thing about it is it changes your water stable aggregates. A lot of your soil health tests now or just lab tests now include water stable aggregate percent. And so I like that, and you can actually see that on those analyses between fields that you do and do not plant green. And so we have no erosion on those fields. And so that is a huge, huge item. I think the other thing is it's very easy to open and close. So when it's green, you're looking at a different environment in that soil. Had you terminated that cover crop a few weeks earlier and you're seeding brown, that's usually a drier scenario, a little more firm, if you will. But when you're planting green, most planters don't have any trouble opening. Where the challenge has always been is closing, right? And so these open and close nicely because they're green. And so that was another aspect. The other thing is when you walk through them, like the one this past spring, I was walking through just taking pictures of life. Couldn't get over the ladybugs in, so it was full of ladybugs. And so you're looking at that whole situation. It's life then. It's green and growing, and you can grow it to the point of your comfort zone, right? And that's why it's a principle. So you react to your environment and what works in your environment. And so, yeah. And then from planting green, we went, we spun out of fall harvest cover crops. So fall harvest, we lost a lot of our window because less wheat. Okay. And so we used to could put in a full multi-species cover after wheat harvest because you had time. You had biological time. Well, then when we went more corn bean, all of a sudden that window got real small. We could still get rye seeded, okay, because we can come in fairly late in our environment and still get it up the next year. And then eventually we went to growing green. And so now we're looking at growing green. And I got to credit Alex Fraser out of Falkland, South Dakota for this one because he taught us how to plant alternate rows of cover and soybean. And so he writes a bit of a prescription, right, based on his resource concerns. And so he used oat, cereal rye, oat, flax. He used 3 or 4 species. And so what he was looking at is mostly cool season grasses because he was a soybean corn producer, so he didn't have those, right? So he's bringing those in, flax in from the mycorrhizal viewpoint. So he brought in these grasses, and so we duplicated that field last year at Minokin Farm. When you stood on the side of it, we before you terminated it, it looked like an oat field. And so it turned out to be a really nice field, and it moved the water stable aggregate dial in comparison to our soybean field that didn't have this. And so that alone spoke volumes to me when I saw that, because now all of a sudden my infiltration's better. I don't have the collapsed soils. So we went through those. We're in those 3 processes. They're all 3 still tools. We use them whenever we can. But we went from just in the fall, then we went from a fall to a biannual fall spring to plant soybean into or canola into, and then we eventually moved into putting it with the crop because we're the Northern Plains environment. We don't have much of a fall. Okay.
Sure.
Spring is cold,
sure,
and wet. Fall is usually dry and quick.
And then here comes winter, right?
And then we're right back into the winter. And so for us, it makes so much sense to have the plant diversity, that holy grail, with the cash crop. And if you can leave it in 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to get the exudates before termination. See? And so now you're starting to check boxes. You're starting to check the boxes of why you even plant a cover crop.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about 60-inch corn. What's the logic behind that?
So I think, to me, more sunlight. I grew up on 40-inch corn with my dad because we grew corn and picked it with a picker.
Mhm.
And then during the winter, it was loaded onto 2-ton trucks with stock racks on them, right back in the 60s and early 70s. And for people with livestock, so they'd get the ear corn because a lot of them like to grind it because of the cob. So I grew up on 40s,
Sure.
and 40s, if I had to pick, 60s are a little wide, but they work because of the math on 30-inch headers. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
40s would be my preference because a 40 would still allow, you wouldn't have to have the plants quite as close together as on a 60
Yep.
because we kept the population static between the 30s and the 60s, but you could back off
Sure.
some. So you're allowing more sunlight in, right? So now you're allowing more sunlight and the entire plant gets sunlight. It does look
Yep.
differently when you walk in and look at that. And then we planted cover crops into it at V5 to V6, which means you can still just drive through it. Okay.
Yep.
And at 60s, you got enough for 3 to 4 rows of covers. Okay. And in 2021, Brandon, we had the big D4 drought. Our 60-inch corn with the covers had 12 species of covers in it. Was like the last field of corn standing in the county. Everything else got chopped because we're in this D4 drought. A lot of the plants weren't even growing. I mean, they just stopped and they were starting to go down.
Yeah.
Okay. And so but that field made it all the way to harvest. It actually yielded 40 bushels of grain. And when
Wow.
you walk through it, I can't tell you how many people walked through that field and explained to me later, it was good we caught that extra shower. And so it was kind of one of those, and I would just say, yeah, it really was helpful. And
Yeah, it really was, huh?
everything that could walk, fly, crawl, slither, I don't care how it got through the world, was in that field because it
Yeah.
was the only thing standing, and it had a lot of cover. And so that one, it's a tool. 60 inches a tool, you're going to take some, our data would say you're going to take some yield reduction compared to 30s. Okay. But if you are a livestock producer and you are capable of grazing this after harvest, still offers some really good scenario, again, based on your goal, right?
Sure.
But if I had my druthers, if I could just pick one, I'd go probably with a 40. Because
40 inch.
Because you'd still get a lot of sunlight in, and you would wouldn't have to have your plants quite as close together as on 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but Dr. Dykstra always tells us you can back off on the population when you're bringing in more sunlight, and when you're talking bricks and photosynthesis, those type things. I think he's probably right on that. If I did it again, I probably would have backed off the population a little bit, and I think we'd have been probably happier with it. But yeah, it's another tool. It's another tool.
Monitoring progress beyond the standard NPK test, phys-chem test type of stuff. Why the PLFA analysis and infiltration rates? Any other tests you suggest also?
So I've done the total mineral. I think it was John Kemp recommended to our group when he did our winter program a few years ago. Total mineral. I like total mineral. It's a one-time. You're going to do it one time. And again, I don't like to spend a lot of money on things, but it's a one-time thing. And what it does is it gives you an understanding of what you do and don't have. And so if these are all there, then the question becomes, well, why aren't they going into my plant, right? Well, then it becomes very biological because you have to have the biology to go ahead and change that from organic to inorganic, and they have to transport it. So you got to have the fungal component, and they have to get it into that plant. And I found it very helpful. So at times, if there's some hesitation that I can't take this next step, well, sometimes you need something assurance that, well, here's what I have. Okay, you have this, and then why isn't it showing up? Okay, so I kind of like total mineral. I do biology when working with a client. It isn't something I would maybe do consistently every year, but some PLFA is nice to take a look at. You could do something similar with respiration, Solvita respiration, because biology respires, and we can measure that type of thing. But what I've used PLFA for quite a bit at Minokin Farm is I can actually see when my percent, either nanograms or percent, either one, improve on the fungal end. And so initially we had plenty of saprophytic, but what we were missing was larger amounts of mycorrhizal. And so we've been able to see that progression. So our mycorrhizal has improved over time with these scenarios. And so it gives us, we're Northern Plains, we're always going to be quite heavily bacterial, but we got to have these other components to be functioning. You know, if you're going to truly function in the biological world, you need those as well. Well, then that all ties together. Everything from the sun's energy, this total mineral biology, all of a sudden you start to see this progression in that field. That farmer said, we're going to work on this field, no holds barred. We're gonna go full in on this field, and I like working that way. And then after that field, then it's up to the farmer how far to go with it.
Please explain how healthy soil structure solves both drought and flood issues simultaneously. So good soil, drought, flood fixes them both.
Yeah, we've seen that in North Dakota over time, that you can get a drought and a flood in the same year for sure. And the lack of soil function is at the bottom of both of them. First of all, you can't get the water in, right? So most of it's going to run off. There's your flood.
Yeah, there's your flood.
You ran most of it off, so you had your flood. And then later that year, of course, since you didn't get the water into the profile, you know, a 4 foot loam profile can hold a good 9 inches. You know, and if you improve your soil organic matter, you're probably going to hold a little more than that even. But you didn't get it into the profile. So once it caps and slakes on the soil surface, it's just kind of game over, and most of that's going to. When we first started moving into these environments, everybody would tell you, if we had a rain, everybody would tell you to the hundreds how much rain you got. So I had 4,800, so I had 6,500. So.
Yep.
And then once we got water hydrology, we actually started to get soils functioning. And then when it rained, and somebody said, how much rain did you get? Then it became all of it. The answer became all of it. And that was a different answer and different thought process, right? But yeah, you're going to see the drought and the flood, they go together. One creates another. And but it's you know, if we have a fully functioning soil, we can store a huge amount of water. If we have a surface cap, we store very little water. And we're always just a few days or weeks away from a drought.
The social principle. Let's discuss a little bit the challenge of neighboritis, right? How do farmers manage the social pressure of farming differently?
Well, I can tell you and we're talking agriculture in general. I think myself as a conservationist, I felt for many years very isolated. I'm sure I had everything from colleagues to others who felt I was maybe a bit strange and don't hang around the strange guy. And so I think it's when you step out of our norm. Something that helped me a lot was just from the viewpoint of any holistic training, you start to take in community, you take in neighbors, friends, you start to address these in your decision processes. And so I think when you do that, I think that was very helpful. And when we did that, we also formed a team. And so we formed a team of people that were on a like-minded goal. How to get the goal varied within the team, which was good, which was really a positive thing. But we were all heading in a generally sane direction type thing. And so we would support each other. And so, because the human being is a social animal to some degree, quite strongly, and I think they need to have some of this interaction. And I think when they don't have that interaction, I think it's more difficult for them on a daily basis. But those two items, forming a team, and then too, the team doesn't have to be next door to you. The team members can be anywhere in today's world, and so it gives you a chance to visit with them, however you want to visit with them, whether it's a telephone call or text or whatever. And so the team was really helpful on just the sounding board and the moving forward. And when we failed on something, we all agreed on the team that we don't revert back to what we used to do. We figured it out. We figure it out and then move forward again. And I think that was a big aspect for us. But I think those two items, and then with the holistic thinking, which is a decision-making process, really helps when you take into all accounts of all these other things, the social aspect, community aspect, all these things. Because sooner or later, you're going to sit down at Uncle Bob's funeral and be across the table from somebody that, how's this going for you? And so,
yeah, you know it.
and I think therein lies, I think there's always ways to deal with these things if you're thinking about them ahead of time as you're stepping into them. And I think that's what the holistic thinking did for us more than anything. It got us thinking about it before, not after it occurred.
Absolutely. So building that team, surrounding yourself with that good group
Really
of people that's kind of
really,
headed down.
really
that's heading down that same path.
All humans need some support.
I like it. I like it. Let's scale this thing up now. Can these principles that we're discussing today work on 10,000 or 100,000 acres the same as they work on one?
Yeah, I think so. That's the whole goal from the get-go, right? Because in production ag, I didn't step into the gardening world until maybe 12 years ago or so. But prior to that, it was strictly large-scale ag. I didn't know any other world. And so we were thinking in terms of those large acreages, and that's where we got into that scenario of setting up a field. And then from there, you got your bases to expand into. So can it be scaled up? Absolutely. And so one of the most passionate clients I ever had a number of garden pots on a deck, okay? And didn't have a piece of ground, but had a deck. And I don't know who was more passionate about soils than this lady. And so it can be quite small. It can be any size. And I think that's the beauty of the principle. And that's what I like better about the principle technique, is it allows that scaling up, scaling down. And I think even things like we talked about putting a cover crop into a soybean field. Well, that soybean field doesn't care once someone's comfortable with the concept, as if it's a 10-acre field or a full quarter section or whatever it is. Then you start to see that. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's scalable, and we know it is. That's a thing. And, and we're starting to see it too more and more, I'll be honest with you, some large production, even specialty crop. Like there's some farms that are a lot more conventional leaning that are starting to reach out and starting to say, hey, I'm interested in this. I've heard about this. So it's a good thing. It's going in the right direction. And it's good to know that, like you said, the lady with the flower pots on her back deck to the guy with the 100,000 acres, it doesn't matter. It can be done. Yeah. And it's just one step at a time, setting those goals and then taking a step at a time.
Well, you're growing some food, and I think people get they buy in strongly, right? And they buy in.
Sure. Awesome. If a grower is at step 0, they haven't started, right? They're just sitting on the sideline on the fence, looking at their neighbors, looking at yours. Yeah. Right? Saying, man, what should I do? Yeah. What is the first thing they should do tomorrow morning?
I'd write a goal. Write the goal.
Perfect.
Write the goal.
That's important.
And start there. And after that, you can start looking at things like maybe even some brief description on a principle, what it looks like to them. There's a difference in the human mind between saying it and writing it. Writing is always a stronger commitment, right? It just forces us to focus more. And so writing a goal, strongly encourage that. And after that, eventually, write the descriptions so they make sense to you in your neck of the woods, right? And I think therein, it doesn't, that first attempt, and I'm here as living proof, that first attempt won't maybe necessarily be that great, but they get better. It gets better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And if you would, we'll kind of wrap it up here, Jay, your final quote, give us your vision for farming forever.
So it's an old goal of mine. I want to farm forever. And my vision on it, I guess, would be nutrient-dense food growing with soil health principle application on that field. And I think if you have those things, there's lots of other mantras, there's lots of other scenarios you read about soil health, plant health, food health, people health. All of those are very similar, but I'm a pretty simple, straightforward person, and I want to farm forever. And if I have nutrient dense food growing with soil health principles, that's a great start.